Now, see, dependent is typically there are two concepts. And we know this already because when we spoke about HOH status and when we spoke about QSS. So, if you remember qualifying surviving spouse and HOH, for a qualifying surviving spouse, we said that there needs to be a dependent child. We already informed this. And for an HOH status, we said that, see, you can have a dependent child or you could also have a dependent relative, right? Or you could also have a dependent relative. And there were other criteria. You have to maintain the principal home for more than half of the year if you are in HOH, or for the full year if it's a QSS. So the question is, who is a dependent? Who would be that child who would qualify? Or who would be that relative who will help you claim him or her as a dependent on your return? Okay. Now, see, first thing is you cannot have. So there are a certain specific, exhaustive list of criteria that has to be met. And if all of these criteria are met, then that child would be termed as a qualifying child. So if all of those criteria are met, that child will be termed as a qualifying child. So there is an acronym, you can use an acronym because these are cases where when you have five criteria to be met, it makes sense if you use an acronym so that you don't get confused between them. Because it's not a concept, it's actually something that you need to memorize. So you can weave in stories around it, but it can be reflected by the acronym RACES. Now, first thing is the person who is a qualifying child. Now, see, if you look at qualifying surviving spouse and if you look at HOH status, the common link between the two is that at least half year has to be the child has to stay with you in the same household, or you have to provide the maintenance of that child. Okay, so you're maintaining a home, which is a principal place of residence for a child who's dependent on you for more than half of the tax year. And the child cannot file a joint return with somebody else. So that's the first criteria, which makes sense because we've already read it in QSS as well as in the HOH definitions. The second thing is, of course, the age limit. The child has to be less than 19 years of age. And if you are a full time student, I would even allow you to be less than 24 years of age and still be claimed as a qualifying child because we would want people to ensure that the children are completing high school, then grad, and then upgrad school. So typically till grad, that 18 plus 4 is your 22, and then another 2 years if you're having any higher studies. So if till all of that, if the parent is supporting the child, I will give you the benefit of claiming that child as your dependent. Now, there are some more, finer points here. One of it says that when you say that the child is a full time student, he or she should be a full time student for at least 5 months in the year. Okay. What do you mean by that? It means, let's say, if the child is finally having his final year of graduation and moving out of college, and here we see that April, May, Jan, Feb, March, April, 4 months he goes to his college, and then in May he finally has his graduation ceremony. Even if one day in the month of May the child is typically a student of that college, we would say that, see, any part of the month, but for 5 full months, any part, even if it's one day for the next 5 months, if the child is enrolled as a student in the university, we can claim that child sorry, we can claim that child as a full-time student. So first thing, the child is having the household which is being maintained by you and staying with you for more than half of the tax year. Second, the child has to be less than 90 or less than 24 if he's or she's a full-time student. Full-time student is how it's defined. It's defined as one any part of the month for at least 5 months of the year you should be enrolled in the college. And last, in case if the child is physically disabled, then we don't have any age limit for qualifying that child as a dependent child. Now, when you say child, now this is something that we already know, right? When we say child, it just does not mean your child. The definition of child is a little varied. It includes your child, your child, maybe son or daughter. It includes your brother, sister, their children. All of that is included in the definition of child. Okay. So first, residence, age limit, close relative. Okay, these two are very important. Okay. Now, again, why is it important and why am I going to discuss the dependents' unearned income after this? Because you cannot understand this really well if you leave that part out. Now, earlier the provisions were different. We used to say that, see, if the child is having a gross income and that gross income is a lot, you cannot claim the child in your return. Now we say no. All that we care about is this is important. Okay. We say that the child should not be providing more than half of his or her own support. Beyond that, whatever the child is earning, I will not pay attention to the earnings of the child. Now, what do you mean by child support? Now, think about a child artist and think about a tennis player who's a child. So, if you see that movie King Richard, and if you see how when Venus Williams, when she got her first contract, I think it was from some 13, 14 million. Okay. So the amounts involved are huge, but even the upkeep is huge because the support of a child is a term which depends on the child's social status and what the child is doing. So we say, see, we are not going to get into the propriety of how much is the support, how much is the income. All we want to know is the child should not be earning, or the child should not be providing more than half of his or her own support. Apart from that, I'm really not interested in figuring out how much is the child earning. But I want you to tie this up with the filing requirements for a child. We say that if there is a child who's dependent on you and that child is earning a lot, if that child starts earning more than the standard deduction amount, I would want that child to file his return. As simple as that. And also, there's a lot of unearned income because we want to avoid the flow of actual income from the parent in the name of the child to earn passive income from it. So, we have some very strict regulations for a child's unearned income. Okay, also, since we are considering the fact that young children less than 19 years of age would also be earning and working, we are also providing a separate set of standard deduction for a child who is dependent on you. Okay, so we say that, see, there's a slab for standard deduction that is applicable for an adult, but there's a different slab that will be applicable for a child. So before all of that, is the child earning a lot? Yes. Can I claim him as a dependent on my return, or can I claim her as a dependent on my return? You could provide the child, provided the child is not providing more than half of his or her own support. So five conditions, all of them, if they are met, we would say that that child is qualifying child. RACE. Same house as yours for more than half of the tax year. A is for age, less than 19 years of age. Close relative, so your child, brother, sister, and their children. I don't care how much money is the child earning, but I do care that the child should not be providing more than half of his or her own support. So if all of these conditions met, the child becomes a qualifying child. Okay, so the worst, actually, these questions are a little tricky because you will see that they're kind of, your mind gets grooved to certain things, right? And it's a little difficult to separate a qualifying child from a qualifying relative. Your mind will keep on intermingling the two. And the most difficult kind of questions that may come in this area is when they give you a scenario and then they'll tell you, okay, how many dependents that this particular taxpayer has? Two, three, four, five, zero. So that's the most difficult to test in this area. Okay, so we are going to take a sum that talks about it. Now, this is as far as the child is concerned. What about a relative? And also, what if not relative, but if it's a friend? Okay, let's say if I have a friend who comes to the US, I'm working, that person is taking her higher studies, and she's staying with me, and I'm providing for his or her support. So if that happens, can I claim that person as a qualifying relative? If yes, how? Okay. Again, there are certain conditions. Okay. This I want you to say is it's either this or this. Okay. So it is port us. Okay. So if the child races through your house and if a relative ports, so if the relative ports us, then in that case, that relative will be a qualifying relative. So how do you define that? First is obviously the child cannot file a joint return with somebody else. So if your child goes and files a joint return with somebody else, you cannot claim that person because that person is already letting somebody else and her or him have a minimum or a reduced tax because of the virtue of filing a married filing jointly return or probably So MFJ with somebody else, you cannot claim that person as a dependent on your return. As simple as that. But if it was an MFJ last year, this year the child does not want to file an MFJ, but there was a refund claim that the child has to claim this year, and for only that purpose, a joint return was filed. In that case, it is still allowable that the child can be treated as a relative on your return. Okay? Now, this is very important. You cannot have people whom you adopt from places outside the US and claim them to be a dependent on your return. Okay, so very simply put, it cannot be that you would come up and say that I'm supporting somebody from India, 5 children, so I'm going to claim all of them as a dependent on my return. You cannot do that, and to prevent doing it, we have made it mandatory that only citizens or residents of US, Canada, and Mexico would qualify for this exception. Okay, so the first is the child cannot file a joint return with somebody else. So precludes filing a joint return with somebody else. Second, PORT US. Only citizens of US, Canada, Mexico. Now this is important. Either the person has to be related to you, and this relation can be huge. My progeny, brother, sister, their progeny, everything will be included. Or, now this is important. That means if there is a friend who comes and stays with me for the entire year, I cannot get an HOH status, but I can still claim that person as a dependent on my return, provided that individual is staying with me for the whole year. So I have a friend who comes and stays with me in the US for the entire year and claim that friend as a dependent on my return. But can I claim an HOH status? Please remember, no HOH status can be claimed, can be claimed for such uh, friends, public, unrelated people. So for HOH, you need to have a relation, which is your blood relation. But for qualifying relative or a qualifying friend, you need not have a relation, provided that person is staying with you for your entire year. Okay, so I want you to understand this delta between a qualifying relative and the claiming of the HOH status. Okay, now this is important. Okay, and why is it important? I'll give you a case scenario so that you can relate to it. Uh, See, let's assume so I have a parent, and that parent is ailing, and that parent is staying and coming home and staying with me. Now, that parent is having a lot of passive income. Okay, so my mother, she had a lot of passive income, and then she comes and stays with me when she gets old. So let's assume a passive income is only $50,000 per year. So we say that, see, passive income is there. So what's passive income? Give me quickly some examples of passive income. Give me some examples of passive income. One second, Rahul. The status will be a single status, whatever. Uh, One second. Rahul, if I'm not wrong, your question is, in case if a friend is coming and staying with you for the entire year and you're claiming that person is a dependent, what will be my state? Unmute yourself, Rahul. Are you there? Can you unmute yourself? Uh, okay. See, when you're following the filing status rules, you always have to go by the logic of filing status, which is if you're single, it will be single. If you're married, you'll be married filing jointly or married filing separately. You cannot have a QSS, you cannot have an HOH. So in this scenario, if I'm assuming that I am single and if I'm staying in the US and a friend of mine comes and stays with me, in that case, my status would still be single, but there may be certain additional credits that I can claim by claiming that person as a dependent on my return. So you will see that there's something called dependent credits, which you can be using. So my filing status will not change because of somebody staying with me for the entire year and I providing support to that person. Right? Yeah, but everybody is saying Social Security, Ritika, some part of it is taxable also. So you cannot say that Social Security is passive completely. Some part of Social Security, there's a maximum limit at which you can tax Social Security. It's up to 85%. But Social Security can be having some part which is taxable. Okay. So yeah, interest, dividends, anything else that comes to your mind when I say passive income? Yeah, interest dividend is great. Anything else? Think what comes to your mind when I say passive income. It's only interest dividend. Anything else that you can think about? Very good. Rent. Yes. Interest, dividend, rent, royalties, capital gains. Think about all of those cases when I would just work for 50 years of my life, and then all the money that I've accumulated, I have put it in, I've put it in sources that will generate me further income without me getting involved in it. So I can invest in properties. I can write books. And those books can give me royalties. I can have software written getting royalties. I can have so interest, dividends, capital gains, all of these will be passive income, right? Yeah, uh, all of these would be passive income, right? So imagine if my mother come home and stays with me, and if my mother is earning a lot of passive income, which is taxable, that means when you go a little ahead and when talk about gross income, you will see that because the IRS wants to promote certain activities, it has given us tax incentives. For example, if I invest in state or local municipal bonds, then I will not be charged any interest. Why? Because state and local municipal bonds would help in, let's say, building up the infrastructure in the states or something, right? So I have a tax incentive if my money is invested in local or municipal state bonds. So we say that, see, it does not matter whether the person who's staying with you has n number of amount of money that is outside the tax. So if it's a tax-free income, we really don't mind. But if it is a taxable income, then I've given you a slab and I say that the income cannot exceed that particular slab. Okay, so PORTUS precludes filing a joint return. Only citizens of US, Canada, Mexico, either somebody is related to you or somebody stays with you for the entire tax year. So PORTU is under a specific amount of taxable gross income. So I can have any amount of tax-free income. So the dependent whom I'm claiming on my return can have any amount of tax-free income, but if it is taxable income, it has to be less than 50. So this is an index figure that changes every year. For the year 2024, I mean for IRC tax code 2024, the amount is $5,050. And again, this is important. The taxpayer must have provided more than half of the support of the person. So you have to provide more than 50% support of the other person, right? So simple. Who is a dependent? Either a qualifying child or a qualifying relative. How can a child become a qualifying child? Races through your house. RACES. Residency, same as yours, for more than half of the tax year. Age limit, which is less than 19 or 24, a full-time student. C is for close relative, closely related to you. E is eliminate gross income test, but the child should not provide more than half of his or her own support. Qualifying relative, PORTUS. Please remember, tax-free income of the dependent is okay. Taxable income has to be less than $5,050. And you should be providing more than half of the support of the other person. So these are the criteria. This is a classic case where I would support the use of acronym. It will really simplify the solving of questions. Okay. Okay, every person. Now, this is something that we saw on the form, right? If you're claiming somebody as a qualifying child, if you're claiming somebody as a qualifying abortive, mm, oh, Kandan, what do you have in mind when you say his question is support more than 50% of the year is continuous? What do you mean by that? Full year. I don't care. It's 1 year, one month on, off. I don't mind. For the entire year, if the child needed $50,000 for the support, or if the relative needed $50,000 for the support, I am providing more than $25,000. I will not break it into months. And it does not need to be consecutive for consecutive months. I'm going to look at the entire year in picture. Kannan, is that clear? I'm going to look at the entire year, full support. Am I providing more than 50% support? Okay. So we need to provide the SSN details of the person. And even if the child has, so this is a requirement. Any dependent who has attained the age of 1 as of the close of the tax year, you need to have an SSN number for that dependent. Okay. a couple of things. Why are we still doing this? Why is this still making sense? Because I have repealed the personal exemption till 2025. So we have removed it till 2025 as of now. But we already know that unless and until I define dependents, I cannot define an HOH. So it has to be a dependent relative or a dependent child. Second, there are certain credits, and you're going to learn about it when we're going to go from 1040. But there are certain credits where again you will have the definition of dependent child, dependent relative, who that will come into the picture. So for that also you need the definition of dependent. So wherever the term dependent is used in IRC, this is how the dependent criteria is defined. The child races through your house and the relative for us. Okay, what happens if the parents split? What happens if there's a divorce? Again, this is important because they'll give you some provisions which will still resonate with the earlier provisions. So, what you have to do is in the answer choice, you need to know okay, this was an old provision, this is a new provision. So, what we used to do earlier is we used to say that, see, if there's a child of a couple who is split, and we will see whoever is earning more, we will ask that parent to claim the child as a dependent on his or her return. But then we said, no, we cannot do that. Why? Because if A and B are married, and if then they split, then we'll look at which parent has the custody of the child. So we're going to split it into custodial and non-custodial parent. And we did that yesterday, right? We'll split it into custodial and non-custodial parent. And whoever is a custodial parent, irrespective of the fact how much of the support of the child is being given by A, in this case, the child can only be claimed as a dependent uh, as a dependent in the books of the custodial parent. Okay, but in this case, we give a right to the custodial parent to relinquish this claim and say, okay, I'll file some paperwork. And since maybe B is the person who's earning more, maybe B is providing for the support of the child. So we say, okay, I fill paperwork. There is a form that I'll be filling up, and I will ask B to claim the dependency exemption for the child. So legally, I am entitled to claim dependency exemption, but I relinquish that right and give that right to my spouse to claim that child is a dependent on his or her return. Technically, the HOH status, who will be able to claim the HOH status, guys, in this situation? In this situation, who can claim? So imagine a scenario A and B are married. A is earning less than B. B is providing for child support. And A has relinquished the right for claiming the child as a dependent on her or his return and has given that right to B. In this case, who will be able to claim the HOH status, A or B? We did this yesterday, guys. You remember? We did this in great details yesterday. Okay, I'm revisiting the entire thing. The child can be claimed as a dependent in the books of non-custodial parent, but the HOH status, if at all needs to be claimed, can be claimed only by A. The HOH status cannot be claimed by B. Why? Because the child is physically staying with A for majority of the year. You remember we spoke about this yesterday? We said that for an HOH status, what is important is not the support of the child in the maintenance of the house. So we spoke about the distinctions between child support expenses and house maintenance expenses. So if the child is physically staying with A for more than half of the year, the HOS status can only be claimed by A and not by B. This is an important thing, guys. If they ask you this question in your MCQ, you would not be able to answer this if you've not registered this. We spoke about it yesterday also when we were doing HOH. So general rule, in order to sum up, general rule, the person who has custody of the child gets the HOH status and the dependency exemption or the dependency claim on the child. But if the custodial parent wishes, they can process a paperwork, file a particular form, and give the right of claiming the child as a dependent to his or her spouse. In which case, the maximum support will be given by B If B will be claiming the child as a dependent, if A wants, A can still claim the HOH status, but A cannot transfer the right for the HOH status to B, because for HOH to be attached or for HOH status to be taken, the physical staying of the physical staying of the child in the house is important, which is not the case here. So please then understand this. If the parent of a child are entitled to claim the child, but do not. So let's say if both the parents agree that none of them will claim the child as a dependent on their return, please see that no one else can claim the child in their return as a dependent unless the taxpayer's AGI is higher than the AGI of the highest earning parent. So if none of them claim, ideally nobody else claims, or even if somebody else is claiming, the AGI needs to be higher than the AGI of the parent who's earning the highest. Child again is a broad definition. It will include the son, so my progeny, brother, sister, their progeny. Okay, everybody. So this is important, guys. Okay, I want you to register this concept. Anybody, any questions on the custodial versus non-custodial, HOH versus dependency exemption? Okay, child will include any kind of a child. It will include legally adopted child, foster child, and just remember for QSS, a foster child is not included. That's the only thing I want you to remember as far as the definition of child is concerned. A relative can be anybody. It could be a parent. It could be a child. It could be, okay. So this is generally child beyond 19 or 21 years. Okay. So if you're still supporting your child who does not qualify for the qualifying child criteria, typically you can claim that person as a qualifying relative. Or let's say there's a child who's not staying with you for the full year, but staying with you for more than half of the year. Okay. I'm looking at a scenario. Let's see if you guys are able to understand this. Okay. So if I'm defining a qualifying surviving spouse, then I need that child to stay with me for the entire year, right? Or in case if the child is staying in the hostel for the entire year, my house should be the principal place of residence for the child. Let's say I have a child who's staying with me for only 7 months. I cannot get a QSS status, but I can still go and take the HOH status because the child is staying with me for more than 6 months, right? So if it is just, let's say, 7 months, I have a child who's staying with me for only 7 months. I say, okay, my status become HOH status. Okay, so please understand that, and let's say if the child is beyond the child's age, right? So this is, let's say, 19 years of age. Let's say the child is 26 years of age, and I am providing for the support of the child. Then in that case, that person will no longer be a child. But if that person is staying in my house for more than half of the year, and if that person is related to me, in which case that person is my child, I will be able to claim this person as a qualifying relative. Okay, how many of you are completely lost now? We don't understand what's happening. QSS, HOH, separate. Filing status, separate. Dependent, separate. When I come to dependent, relative, child. Child, not less than 19 years or less than 24 years, full-time student, RACES. Related to me, age criteria, uh, close. So residency is mine for more than half of the tax year. Age criteria, a close relation, eliminate gross income tax. The child must not be earning, I don't care how much of money the child is earning, the child should not be providing more than half of his or her support. So try to, in your mind, try to segregate these concepts. At the same time, try to figure out the delta between these concepts. Okay, when can I have a QSS? When can I have an HOH? I can have an HOH if the criteria for QS is not met. Okay. Support is typically economic support. I'm giving money and all those items such as food, clothing, shelter, medical kit. So everything will cover in support. And this support is again a very subjective term because it depends. So if I'm talking about Venus Williams or Serena Williams, then their tennis training becomes support, even if it is costly. Okay. So if I'm talking about child artists, then all of those classes that child is taking from somebody, again, that becomes child support, which may not be the case for a normal other child. Okay, so the definition of support and what kind of support the child deserves is related to the social status and the work that the child is doing. Okay, I think, okay. One more concept before we go to the questions. Okay, and I think once we go through those questions, which will have the toughest ones, we are going to take the ones which are most confusing. But if you master those, then you will be able to understand this concept thoroughly. Now, what happens if a scenario is something like this? Okay, the scenario is, let's say we are three siblings. Okay, I have a brother, I have a sister, and this is me. And uh, our dad is single. So we say, okay, I have a dad, and what we're doing is, my dad wants to stay with his in his house. He doesn't want to move around with his kids. So he says, okay, I'm going to stay where I am put, but we want to take care of him. So we say, okay, let us each give one third of the support of the dad. So what is one third of the support, and what is his support? Support means maybe his medicines, rent, the person's salary who's employed with him, or anything, grocery, whatever is the upkeep and support of that of my dad. All our three siblings will take one third support. Tell me who will claim that person as a relative, as a dependent? So what did we say? We said we need to provide more than 50% support of a relation of a relative in order to claim that person as a relative on my return. Right? But here nobody is giving 50% support or more than 50% support. Everybody is giving 33rd, one third, one third, one third, one third. So who will claim? Are we going to split the dependence claim? How are we going to do it? Are you able to understand the scenario? There are more than one person who's supporting a person, maybe related, unrelated. And if that support totals a support of more than 50%, but each one of them are supporting to the tune of less than 50%, then who claims the support? Do we just prorate the support? What do you think should be the answer? What do you think should be the answer? Who should be claiming that person is a dependent on their return? Who should be claiming? But nobody is providing more than 50%, right? Nobody is providing more than 50%, isn't it? So IRS has come up with a solution, and they have technically called it multiple support agreement. Okay, so we call it multiple support agreement. What's a multiple support agreement? When there are two or more people who are all either a qualifying relative or a qualifying child. And in total, so when I see them as a group, they're providing more than 50% support, but none of them are providing less than 50% support. So generally what we do is we say, okay, you decide, one of you will take that person as a dependent on his or her return. And then the other, so it will be like year one, we will take, my brother will take, and then he will take that deduction, and we will file some paperwork and let the IRS know that, see, this is the total, this was his share, these are our shares, so he will get the credit for our shares. And then next year I can take, or my sister can take, and the third year I can take, and then we can switch turns in taking support of that person. So there is an economic incentive if you support a relation of yours or a child of yours, or if the child is supporting a parent, in such a scenario where there are multiple people who are all totaling up to more than 50% support. That means if there had been one child giving more than 50% support of a dad, we would have definitely considered that child and given him the dependency claims, right, or the dependency benefit. But since there are more than one person here, each one of them are eligible to claim the support. We have come up with a solution. We'll say, okay, any one person can take it in a year. We can roll it forward to somebody else. And the support given by the others, you file a paperwork, let us know that's a multiple support agreement, and we'll give you the requisite credit. We've laid down certain criteria. First, please see that the support has to be at least 10%. Because see, we are going to do a lot of paperwork. We are going to reconcile your return with your sister's return and your brother's return to see whether the support is making sense. And it has absolutely no sense if even 10% support is not being provided by that contender to the claimed dependent. Second, you cannot have one person giving more than 50% support. The moment, let's say, if in this same scenario, if let's say I would give, my brother would give, let's say, 55%. And let's say me and my sister are sharing the balance. We say, okay, the moment one person is himself or herself claim more than 50%, then the dependent will be claimed on his or her return. And the question of multiple support agreement will not arise. Okay. And last, joint contributors are required to file a multiple support. So do the paperwork under Form 2 and 2. Do you need to memorize the form? The answer is no. Just remember some paperwork needs to be filed in order to get this claim. Okay. Now look at this question. T, who is single and lives in California, has no income of his own and is supported in full by the following people. There is a neighbor, his brother, and his daughter. Now, see, the moment you see this, immediately in your mind, what should come up is support, is the support or qualifying relative, which means what? Portus. Okay? Portus. Okay, so what have we said? We've said C. One is that the person should not file a joint return. That was with somebody else. Then we said that person should be a citizen of US, Canada, Mexico. Whenever you get a question like this, I strongly suggest that you make these acronyms and then you click and you cross so that there is no confusion in the process. Okay. Then we say either the person has to be related to you or the taxpayer, the person has to stay with the taxpayer for the entire year, right? So either of the two, either related or stays with you for the entire year. And then we said this person should have under a particular level of income. So his gross taxable income should be less than 5050, and that person's more than 50% support should be given by you. So there are PORTUS. There are 6 criteria. For each of the 3 dependents that we talked about, or for each of the 3 support providers, let us see how much of these criteria are being met. First, Carl. Do you think he's meeting the criteria for for claiming Tony as a qualified relative on his return? Please answer. Think and answer. PORTUS. So, which criteria is Carl not meeting? Which criteria is Carl not meeting? Yes. Which criteria is Carl not meeting? No, but see, we are going to now, instead of support, we'll go to multiple support. Again, the same one. 1 second. See, instead of support, we will go to multiple support. And what is multiple support saying? Multiple support is saying that each should provide more than 10% and none should provide more than 50%. So in this case, this is more than 10%. So X is greater than 10% and less than 51% or less than equal to 50%. So this S criteria is met for Carl. Which criteria is not met? So neither is he related to you, nor is Tony staying with Carl for the full tax year. See, he's not filing a joint return because he's single. He's a resident of US. If nothing is written, you will assume that, and he's living in California. Then he has no income. So this criteria is met. You're providing more than 10, less than 50. The S criteria is met. This criteria is not met because neither is Tony related to Carl, nor is Tony staying with Carl for the full tax year. He's the neighbor. He's not staying in the same house. So Carl will not be able to claim T as a dependent on his return. Then go to the next one. Tony's brother. So now think of his brother's perspective. So is he providing more than 50, more than 10, less than 50? The answer is yes. So support criteria is being met. S is being met. Under criteria is being met. He is related to me. Great. He is a citizen of US, Canada, US actually. And he's not filing the return with anybody else. So PORTUS. All criteria met for Peter. So Peter can claim Tony as a dependent on his return. See that Tony is qualifying relative. What about Martha, who is Tony's daughter? Is she meeting the criteria? Is Martha meeting the criteria? Yes, because she's not providing a minimum of 10% support. So the S criteria is not being met. So in this example, who would be able to claim Tony as a dependent? The answer is only Peter, because only Peter is meeting PORTUS criteria. So the way you need to understand is if it's a qualifying child, RACES, if it's a qualifying relative, PORTUS. Also, S becomes multiple support agreements if there are more than one person who are, or more than one taxpayer who's supporting a particular dependent. But in this case, each should provide less than 10%, none should provide more than 50%, and they should execute proper paperwork. Yes, Kanan, write the full question. Okay. Oh, yes. Okay. Kandan's question is if Martha would have provided 76%. Now, first of all, the moment one taxpayer is providing more than 50%, even only that person will be getting the claim. Nobody else will get it. Then only Martha would get it. Oh, 6%. Peter would anyways be eligible. Why would Peter not be eligible? Kandan, I'm not able to understand your question. If Martha provides 6%, then why would Peter not be eligible? Peter would still be eligible, right? Oh, if Peter, nah, I don't understand your question, then Kanan. Do you want to unmute and put your question? Otherwise, we'll have to go. I don't see your question in the chat panel also. Okay. What about divorced parents? Okay, so what do we do with dependents? We actually write two acronyms, and against each, even if you know these questions really well, you will see that's very confusing when you get to actual questions. So, in my suggestion is the moment you see a question on dependents, and the worst kind of questions is when they'll ask you, oh, okay, wait 1 second. Kannan has put his question. His question is if Martha provides 6%. Okay, if Martha provides 6%, then you're trying to say, and 43 plus 6 is not meeting 50% support. No. Okay, Kannan, you're wrong. Why? Because the moment it is 6%, then Martha is not qualified. See, are you able to understand? Yeah, exactly. If Peter is more than 50% support, only Peter. Okay, Karsten, unmute. What is your question?
Ma'am, I think what he's trying to say is that if Peter is solo, meaning if he's taking it alone, shouldn't he have provided 50% of the support?
No, but
We
see, this
eliminated the other.
no, no,
We
but see,
eliminated
this is
the
a
other.
multiple support agreement. See, this is a multiple support agreement, right?
Right. So in that situation, more than 10 is enough. It's not 50% then, basically.
Okay, wait. I'm understanding you. You guys are saying that in this case, we are having multiple support, but only one person meets the criteria for multiple support. Then in that case, if that person's total is coming to less than 50%, will he or she still qualify? Is that your question?
I think that is the question. Yeah. Yeah.
No. But in this case, see, no, see, this is a multiple support because there are three people who are supporting a child, who are supporting a dependent. But since only one person is meeting the full criteria, but that person is not providing more than 50%, so he will not take the full support. He will get only the figure which is corresponding to 43%. Okay, but this is a question which nobody has asked me before. Okay, so I'll write this question and I'll check this before I come back to you guys. Okay, because uh, this is a multiple support, but when the other two people are not qualifying for the criteria, in this case, let me come back to you on this. Okay, because it's a good question. I know that the answer is that Peter can claim, but the question is how much can he claim? Can he claim the full support? Because in this case, the others are not qualifying. So I'll come back to you on this question. Just give me a day's time. Let me look at it and I'll come back to you on this. Okay? But that's a good question. I've been teaching this for a very long time. Nobody asked me this question before. And I also didn't think about it. It's a good question. Okay. Uh, One more thing. What about divorced parents? General rule: whoever has custody of the child will take the child as a dependent on his or her return. It's not determined by the divorce decree. It is not determined by who provides what support. It's only dependent on where is the child spending most of his or her time. As simple as that. Okay. If they have equal custody, in that case, only in that case will the parent who has a higher AGI, that parent will be able to claim the dependent on his or her return. General rule: I don't care what the divorce decree says. I don't say who's providing more support. I will only see who is physically spending or the child is physically spending time with which parent. Whichever parents is a parent with whom the child is spending more than half of the tax year, that parent will be able to claim the child as a dependent. But can I give this right to the other party? The answer is yes. I can file a paperwork and I can relinquish this right, but I will not be able to give the other party the privilege of taking the advantage of inactuate status.